Hello, everyone. Thanks for coming back from lunch. I heard it was delicious, but we were stuck in the speaker room, so we missed it. OK, well, let's start off with some self-intros. I guess we can start, ladies first, with Anthurine.
Hello. Yeah, so Anthurine from EthStorage have been in this space since 2018, always doing like infra stuff. Before that, I'm doing like the traditional tech company in Silicon Valley and also like finance in New York. Do we need to do a little bit for the project? Okay. So EthStorage, it's a storage layer for Ethereum. That is saying we're layer 2 native IPFS for Ethereum. We can be layer 3 for any layer 2 as well. So that's why we're working with a lot of layer 2 instead of like competing, because most of layer 2 trying to get more TPS. We're just helping them to store more stuff on chain, like much lower like cost. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jacob. I'm a Rust developer in the blockchain space since about 2017. I recently joined Matter Labs, which is, they're the developers of ZK Sync, which is a zero-knowledge layer 2 on Ethereum that tries to fulfill the values of the ZK credo.
Hey guys, my name is Terry. I'm head of strategy at Eclipse. Eclipse is bringing Solana onto Ethereum. We're building the first Solana virtual machine layer 2 on top of Ethereum. Great to meet y'all.
Cool. So today's panel is about governance. Now we have one live chain, which is ZK Sync. I believe Eclipse is kind of live. You can tell us more about that. And EthStorage is still in testnet. But I'd like to hear how everyone is approaching governance. I guess in the case of ZK Sync, what's live, and in the case of y'all, what will be live, or how you're thinking about it.
Sure. All right. So as of a couple of weeks ago now, ZK Sync's governance is live through something called ZK Nation, which is our governance platform. It has it's a three-pronged approach. There's the token delegates, there is the Security Council, and there are the guardians. So token delegates, of course, using the ZK Sync token, can submit and vote on proposals. And then the two other councils are made up of individual members that have veto or emergency powers.
I can go. One of the key flaws of an L2 is liveness in the case of a single sequencer failure, right? So say, for example, you're Arbitrum Optimism, and you have a single sequencer, and some reason, like there's an explosion in the region that their AWS box is in, their sequencer goes down, then the chain is down for as long as a 24-hour, I believe, period before where someone can open up the settlement window or the settlement contract for permissionless proposals. I think that is the biggest kind of weakness of L2s today. And so where we're thinking about is, okay, let's have a decentralized sequencer set, number one. But let's have it such that we can prevent collusion by having a mechanism of governance where you can vote out existing sequencers from the sequencer set and replace it with a governance designated entity. That's like number one that we're thinking about. And of course, like second of all, we will have, for the time being, guardrails around upgradability of the bridge, with something similar to you guys, in which case is a Security Council. So those are kind of like the two-pronged governance items that we're thinking about right now.
Yeah, so EthStorage is a little bit different, like I mentioned before. So we're not like a typical L2 aim for the more TPS. We're like helping Ethereum as like layer 2 and also helping other layer 2 as layer 3. So in that case, so there definitely will be a lot of like multi-chain stuff. So currently we're still on the public testnet, so we're designing that. But for sure, so we will consider like, how to gather like multi-chain governance into one. We have been very active for the OP governance, and I think it will be great to take a lot of like their lessons, and definitely they're doing great. Since today's topic is about like governance, so one product we have been developing, I think it's worth to mention here is Web3 protocol, decentralized HTTP. So the idea of that is right now, all the apps, although they're like decentralized, as like an app, but their front end, their website, everything is centralized. So basically, they have to conquer like DNS, Infura, those kind of like centralized components. So what we do is helping them to decentralize everything. So basically, they can just store their like front end in the smart contract. So in that way, so even their website can through the governance. So if they want to update any like, the code or change any part, so that process had to through like the governance as well. In that case, it's really hard to hack because a lot of like hack come from the DNS hack. And that part, we already support a lot of like L2 and L1. Yeah, so for that, that's something we want to explore later, like how to governance through like the decentralized web hosting.
Very interesting. I'm curious. Okay, so in your case, Terry, I guess it's mostly aspirational, right? You're not live yet.
Yeah, mostly aspirational.
Fully, right?
Security Council is live.
That's great. But I'd still love to hear, I mean, I assume you guys have pretty clear design in mind at this point. Is there anything that you would still take from any other L2, like some feature of their governance that you think is really smart and you wish you had implemented, but maybe you didn't have time for? And I'd love to hear from the others as well.
Nothing particular comes to mind, right? Like I think generally like token governance, like I think Arbitrum, like something that comes to mind is what I don't want to do, which is I think Arbitrum DAO capital allocation based on token governance voting was a large mistake. Because the way Arbitrum DAO works is basically Arbitrum DAO has a huge treasury of all of its ARB, and on top of that, all sequencer revenue per year goes back to the Arbitrum DAO. All the DAO treasury is controlled by people who coin vote. Delegates can propose ways this treasury can use their capital, and then these are ratified via token holder voting. And so recently what happened was like a couple of the gaming delegates got together and proposed a $200 million Arbitrum gaming fund. Right? Arbitrum is neither a really great place or technically suitable for gaming. It is not really a place where there has been a lot of gaming innovation, with the exception of Treasure DAO, who has kind of spearheaded this movement. And so it is questionable whether that is a good use of capital or not. It is kind of hard to tell at the moment. Gaming has a very long investment cycle, and it takes a very long time for it to pay off. And if it can bring 1 million, 2 million users onto Arbitrum orbit, that is actually a huge payoff. But it is unclear whether it was a good choice or not. And it was something that the token holders were able to pass through. So that's something like an example where I don't think it's a good idea to put capital control in the hands of token holders.
Jacob?
That's a really good question. I think that governance is really difficult to get right, as we've seen from reality. Yeah, practical experience. Capital allocation is definitely a tough one. Projects that I've worked with before have had many issues with, giving out grants or something like that to projects that end up not following through, it's difficult to see the future. And I think people are really concerned about their bags, and so that's going to be one of the issues that gets probably most of the negative press, and therefore most of the eyeballs, is going to be misallocation, misuse of capital.
Although we haven't had the concrete design, the plan for everything for governance, but we do have some small try for the grants. For example, like how to distribute the grant, because usually the team decide who will get how much, and this time we are actually working with some developer communities. So what we do is we have a small 1 month campaign stuff. So during that campaign, so they help us to recruit developers, study what's the Web3 protocol, the decentralized HTTP I mentioned, how does that work, and they're helping them to build something. And then letting the developers, holders, that community holders, and us, so together to decide who will get how much, something like that, yeah.
So I know both of you guys mentioned security councils, right? Now, when I hear that, I think, oh, we can't trust token holders. We can't really trust token holders, right? And now you just mentioned you also don't think token holders should really be trusted with the bags either. So I do wonder, what do you trust token holders to do?
So this is where I think, like replacing the sequencer and or potentially replacing one or few of the sequencers is a good idea because, and this is kind of a nebulous thought that we have at Eclipse as well. But if you issue a token on L2, I assume ZKS is issued on the L2, not on L1. Right? So like Arbitrum is also issued on the L2. Then all the funds that are locked and issued in canonical on the L2, if there is a liveness issue with the sequencer or censorship with the sequencer, they become invalid on the L1, right? Versus like an L1 asset that you lock through the canonical bridge, if there is an issue, you can just withdraw from the canonical bridge, right? So if you have an asset that's issued on the L2, it's not on the canonical bridge and therefore on the L1. If the L2 goes down, then they're gone. So if you issue your native token on the L2, right, then those people that hold the native token on the L2 have the vested interest in the correct continuation of the liveness and safety guarantees of the sequencer's operation. Right? And so giving them control over that is in a way incentive alignment versus giving them control over the entire treasury, which can be used in various different ways to benefit various different folks who have various different bags in the ecosystem is incentive misalignment. So that's where like my thought is going is what do the token holders of the L2 really care about and what is critical to their success? To me, it is something that they should then have control over there.
It's a genuinely difficult problem. I'm not sure that I'm fully on board with the statement that I don't think I said that I don't trust the token holders with the bags. I said it's a very difficult problem. And as we saw like recently with Optimism, sometimes the Security Council has to step in and perform very essential services to protect the network. It is definitely an issue with centralization of power because, as you mentioned, if there is a Security Council of 12 individuals who have like ultimate veto power or something like that, then really they kind of do have this centralized power where they can just say, yeah, you know what? Nope, I don't trust the token holders with this proposal, and they have that power. But it's this constant push and pull between, with centralization of power, you have people who can act quickly and decisively, and sometimes in the case of, if there's a network issue, that is potentially a very valuable and important way that the Security Council can step in and act to protect the L2. But then, conversely, you look at that and you say, well, now again, we have more power and trust centralized in these individuals, which if they act poorly or against the interests of the network or something like that, then now you're in trouble in a different way. So it's a difficult push and pull.
And I guess to clarify, like there's not a single implementation of a Security Council in L2 today that is controlled by the token holders. They're mostly people who are reputable kind of folks inside crypto and or reputable folks inside the ecosystem. And their kind of very narrow role is to be able to either pause withdrawals or pause the bridge, is my understanding. Those are the two things that you can do.
Yes, and when you say reputable people, though, that is another way of saying just trust, right? Usually we say don't trust, verify, but in this case they're reputable. It's a argument based on authority. They have this reputation, they've acted this way in the past, we're trusting them to act this way again in the future. And that's difficult to square with a lot of the values that we typically like to espouse in crypto.
It's definitely a guardrail that L2s have to. It's like a diaper where they have to take it off one day, to get potty trained.
I think that would be the ideal, but again, it's really tough to get to that point.
Fair, because it's impossible to have like secure code that is just like by definition secure, right?
Yeah, I think people who are developers have probably heard of code rot, right? Code in many cases is a liability. We, as developers, we see more code, more complexity is often a liability rather than, a resource, especially, if you want to deploy an upgrade or some new attack vector comes out, it's constant state of development.
Yeah, I think Tara just mentioned if we put all the things in L2 and if something happens, so how can we just withdraw the funds or something? Because I think a lot of L2 have such an issue because it's too centralized, very limited nodes, and yeah, so that's why I think if by require you have to submit your data into a DA layer, right? If it's by for A44 or Celestia or whatever, yeah. I think that's not something about the governance. That's something about if something happened on L2, whether you can just withdraw your money because on L1 we know you can do that, but on L2s, so what's the design for that? Yeah, and what we do is actually helping all the DA to maintain the data forever, just in case if something happens, we still have all the history data, and then we can just withdraw the money, withdraw all your fund. Yeah.
It would be more imagine the sequencer goes down and it stops posting batches to the DA layer. Then you're like, okay, all our funds on the L2 are stuck. If it goes through the L1 bridge, then you can take it out using forced withdrawals. But if it's not, then you need a way to make sure you can elect a new sequencer, which is where governance can come in useful.
You seem very concerned with liveness. Is that because you work with Solana VM?
So we won't suffer the same. So a lot of the Solana issues back in, I would say January 2023, there were a bit of consensus bugs. They have been patched. If it does happen again, yeah, that would be of concern. But just because we have a means to elect a new sequencer, it wouldn't necessarily be able to resolve consensus bugs in the fundamental Solana client, actually.
Yeah, it's tricky, right? Because you're in a lot of ways using someone else's code, right? And they kind of solve those problems for themselves. But then if you want to be Solana equivalent, then you're going to have to kind of, yeah, you put yourself up for a very hard job, basically, it seems to me.
Well, so we've built the L2 in a very modular way, such that anytime the Agave client, which is the Solana client, pushes an update, just instantly we can update our L2 execution engine as well. So 2 weeks ago, actually, Solana had a critical vulnerability where they needed to push out an update to the SPPF backend. So part of the virtual machine that kind of the Solana code compiles down to. Yeah, we got that done in 30 minutes, just right after the patch was pushed.
Very cool.
That's really impressive, and I really respect the people who, like you said, are doing the hard tasks, because the people who avoid the hard tasks are not the people who are going to make the changes. So, props to you.
Thanks.
Cool. So, I guess the way we've been talking so far, it sounds like L2s need governance, they need a security council, they need all these things. And yet, obviously, we're all building on Ethereum, which doesn't have any governance, right? So is there a reason why it's not possible to have an ungoverned L2? Is that ever going to happen? What do you think about that?
Ethereum definitively has governance. There is a means for which, right? There's a bunch of hard forks. Every year you get a hard fork, and if you want to have a hard fork, you need some way for people to decide, what to include in this update. How do you communicate this with the validator clients that are building actually the implementation of the Ethereum software? And how do you, in the past it used to be that you also needed to coordinate with miners, but now you also need to coordinate with LSTs and all these large organizations that have stake in Ethereum all need to be coordinated if you want to push out a significant update, right? And so there is a kind of social process in Ethereum. It happens via these core developer calls where ideas get inseminated and then they become disseminated in the research forums, and then people comment, and then they become. I actually don't know how things get included in hard forks. I actually don't know. Maybe.
I mean, it depends on the hard fork.
But how do you decide? Oh, this is going to get in Pectra. This is going to get in Shanghai, or how do you decide?
That's not something that I can speak on with a great deal of experience. So
Yeah, fair. So there's a method in Ethereum in which like things get included in updates. And in a sense, the L2 is very similar, right? The L2 is a dynamic network where things change, and there needs to be a way for our ideas to generate and then get disseminated in the network and then get implemented inside the actual execution engine of the L2. Now, whether that's in the settlement layer, the bridge, the withdrawals, or the actual execution environment, that still means that you need some sort of governance process. So what I'm trying to say is like ETH has a governance process, and therefore L2s can continue to have a governance process. Even Bitcoin has a governance process, right?
I think Ethereum and like you mentioned, Bitcoin, while they do have governance, they also have the advantage of being significantly older, more mature, larger ecosystems than any of the L2s we're talking about here. And when you're talking about a much smaller ecosystem, especially when you have a governance token, you have to worry about, like there's a larger set of malicious actors that would have a capability to like buy a large amount of the governance token, for example, and start submitting like these bogus proposals or even actively malicious ones. So when your ecosystem is larger or bigger or older, I think while Ethereum definitely does still have governance, sometimes, as you mentioned, it doesn't necessarily it's not staring you straight in the face so much.
I guess it has governance on what the direction of the network goes insofar as if you have a large percentage of stake, you can decide to run a different version of Ethereum, or like, you can decide to ignore a hard fork and go toward another path. And as long as you get enough of the stake in like the governance pool, then you can kind of like fork Ethereum, quote unquote.
Are people still worried about Lido?
I don't think it's ever going to happen, but like you could. It's not like Vitalik says, "Oh, here's pure DAS. Now everyone vote. Do you want it in the next hard fork?" It's just that people decide to run it on their client software, right?
Yeah, I think both of you already just mentioned a lot of part. I think for Ethereum, definitely it has like governance, right? Because we know there's like core dev team. We know there's like a Ethereum Foundation to decide where the grant goes. And there's like, even for the meeting side, like the AdCon, DevCon or something, they're like just a different like organization doing like different stuff. Like you said, there's no like, proposal saying like, we want to do this feature. Everyone vote whether we want to do that. I think it's because it's big in love, and it cannot just let all the individual to decide like the important things. Otherwise, because we know the valuation is so high, a lot of people who who has like bet on that will be hurt for that. Otherwise, for the L2, which is has much small history for that, I think they're just trying to do something different to see whether this works. Like OP, it definitely is like more transparent compared with like Ethereum. I think their intent to do that, to see like whether that works. But still, I guess for the future wise, so they will have a lot of like proposal for the community saying like, we want to try this one. So what do you guys think? But I don't think they give like all the power to see, okay, everyone has the token to vote for that, right? It's just like they give like more transparency. I guess for L2s and the protocols like us, who are less mature, still you need a lot of like guidance at the very beginning. And then, so you need a lot of involvement from the community to build your consensus. So Ethereum threw a lot of time to build their consensus already. Yeah, I guess doing governance is like a process of building consensus, yeah.
So what do you guys think is the role of token holders in relation to sequencer fees, right? Should token holders in L2s receive sequencer fees? I mean, we've seen the amount of tax that L2s pay to L1 go down significantly, right? So Ethereum is not really receiving as much taxes as it used to before 4844. So where are those sequencer fees going to go in the future, and how do you guys think about that income, right? In Ethereum, we had a very clear system. We burned the ETH. It benefits everyone. In L2s, where's the money going?
I think sequencer fees should go to dApps. dApps are where fees are originated. People want to transact with dApps. dApps bring in execution revenue for the L2. Sequencer fees and execution revenue should therefore go to dApps. Now, if there's any excess that you can charge because there are network effects of being on your L2 in particular, then it's a question of, I think it's then a question of like legality, right? Like, can you actually distribute that to token holders or not? Then of course they should belong to the token holders if the token holders are owners of the protocol, but then, like that is a question of legality.
I'm not sure I have a great answer to that question.
What are you currently doing with sequencer fees?
As I mentioned, I just joined Matter
No
Labs,
worries,
so
no worries.
I don't know that part.
It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. It's all right. They're not significant anyway at the moment, so I don't think it's an issue.
We don't have sequencer because we're like storage node for people who provide that. But I actually agree with Terry. I think partial of like a sequencer fee need to go to the dApp, and dApp can decide whether they want to get back to their users, because the user who are using their dApps and to just create gas or like sequencer fees, right? But they can decide that part, yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's a great point, right? As someone who builds on top of L2s and not building an L2 myself, I think, yeah, we should get the money, right? However, I'm curious, how do you think of attribution? Because having been on the other side of that, recently Optimism did the retroactive public goods funding, and I mean, for those who are kind of in the middle of that, attribution was a bitch. Like, it's very hard to tell. Like, when you say a dApp, right? If everybody's using USDC, does that mean USDC should get fees, or should it be this contract or that contract? An Ethereum call goes for a lot of different contracts. So who exactly should get those fees?
So perfect attribution is impossible. Voting attribution should never be done. What Blast does is, say in a contract call, you hop through multiple contracts and you pay a total priority fee. It gives the priority fee in excess of the base fee pro rata depending on how much gas your contract uses. Yes, you can say this incentivizes people to raise, make it inefficient to use, can we stop this thing? Oh, okay. Yeah, and we can say, oh yeah, that incentivizes me to make horribly gas inefficient contracts. But if that's the case, then either number one, the cost is borne down to your users, in which case they will stop using your protocol and move on to something else that is more gas efficient. Or number two, you are actually routed through in a composable protocol, and because of that, someone will use something else that is more gas efficient. Or number three, you actually have the ability to charge someone that much more margin because people are sticky and want to stick with your product. So no matter what, it's actually fine. Yeah, of course we want to encourage people to make things very, very gas efficient, but in crypto where everything's open source and there's an incredibly competitive dynamic on dApps and infrastructure as well, I think this will resolve over time. So I think like the Blast method of doing pro rata depending on how much gas you use is actually not a bad method. And in fact, the top dApps on Blast have received up to, I believe, 200 ETH in gas rebates because of sequencer fee revenue share, and that's very significant.
Yeah, I wasn't aware of that. That's very cool. In the case of Optimism, they just did a really bad job. So that sounds much better.
Come to Eclipse.
And we don't do Solana. I'm sorry. But yeah, I guess. How do you guys? Okay. Sorry. Cool. Well, we have 1 minute left, so I'm gonna give it to y'all to share some closing remarks on whatever you like.
Okay, yeah. So, I still want people to learn a little bit about like Web3 protocol, the decentralized HTTP, because that one I feel like we need the real decentralization from the bottom to the end. So right now, all the apps I still have like two centralized components. So if you're like the app, or if you're just like a website, if you want to decentralize your website, just come to me and talk to me. Thanks.
So Matter Labs is a value-driven company, and you can see all of those values written out in the ZK Credo. It's not long. If you have, if you've read the Cypherpunk Manifesto, I think it's probably about the same length, maybe a little bit shorter. I would encourage you to go read that. I think possibly the most relevant point of that document to this discussion is the right of users to exit the protocol with low fees. So we've been talking about governance. We've been talking about any issues with power or something like that, centralization. And one of the things that zk-sync is really focused on is making sure that users can exit the protocol low fees anytime if they don't agree with what's going on. So that's my conclusion.
Fun fact, the bonsai tree over there is $70,000. Eclipse is building Solana on ETH. If you are an ETH maxi and you've always been jealous of Solana, now's your chance to play around with something that's bringing Solana onto Ethereum as an L2. If you are someone who loves Solana and you love transacting on Solana, now's your chance to try something where you can pay gas fees in ETH and you can have access to ETH liquidity, but it feels like Solana, and hopefully one day it'll be faster than Solana. Right now it's about a fifth of the cost, but hopefully we'll be able to bring it the speed over faster than Solana as well.
Amazing. Thank you, guys.
Thanks for moderating.